Radul, thank you. I am on mute. Yes, I normally keep it muted until Ed shows up, and then I unmute it. Apologies for that. But nevertheless, hopefully Ed will show up. I've not heard from him, so it's not like he's definitely not coming. But the show must go on, right? So have a couple of items that we'll save for another night, unless Ed pops on here. But a few things that can still discuss with you all, and of course can still take questions and all that wonderful stuff. And we'll just kind of wing it. All right. Appreciate everybody with the audio check. Thank you very much for that. I do want to say that the new camera is on the way. We've had a couple of really, really awesome people that offered to send cameras, and I will find out that they're okay with me saying who they are before I say, but a huge thank you to you. And you all know who you are. So new camera's on the way, so that will clear some of this stuff up. New mic is on the way, so I'm super excited for that. Next thing is going to be a PC. Got to do a built PC, nothing like brand new fancy, but we're going to do something that can definitely handle some better quality streaming. And that's going to allow me to do some things like work with OBS like I had long ago when it was just me back on the show. But I'll be able to bring Ed along with that and all that wonderful stuff. So I hope you all are excited for that. I'm definitely excited for that. We're going to improve the quality of the stream, at least audio and visual wise anyways. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be an adventure. And that's also going to allow me to do some editing on that new computer. The laptop I have now, it can't keep up with the good editing software. So that's going to allow me to get videos out quicker, more efficiently, and hopefully some nicer videos. I can actually put that green screen to work a little bit more once I have that going on. Andre Ellis, does anyone know any YouTubers that specialize in garamis or other labyrinths? I don't know anybody that specializes in them. I know there are probably a couple of dozen YouTubers that have done videos, if not more. But I would just do a search, and typically what I'll do is maybe pick five or six, and just go and look at those. I try and get a couple that don't necessarily have the same thing to say. Maybe get some different perspectives. It's always great when you can find a video that says, I tried this and it didn't work, to kind of give you a heads up and say, hey, just be warned, if you try this, you may run into an issue. I do want to say a huge thank you to Stephen Hubbard, who came in with the $2 super sticker with the Hey You pair before the stream even started. Thank you very much for that, Stephen. Very much appreciated. That one's got half a string on it, but we make it work anyways, right? So one of the things I would like to talk about tonight is setting up a saltwater tank. I'm curious how many of you all have done a saltwater tank, what your experience was with it, and how many people are curious about it. I won't say that I get a ton of questions regarding converting a tank over, but I do get a decent amount of people that say, I'm thinking about going salt. What do I need? Can I use what I have? And then, of course, the more common is, I'd love to do salt, but it's just too hard. It's too hard. It's too much work. Thank you. It's just made James' beard look more lustrous today. Yes, so I went back to got some beard oil in there, and we used the beard iron, the things we do for television, right? Andre Ellis says, I miss saltwater. I was an invert norm. Awesome. Yes, I miss. I had a lot of different corals, but the thing I'm finding I miss the most is my zoanthids. I really, really miss zoas. And then tangs. Tangs is another one. Mrs. Fever, she's a huge tang person. So Terry's Tropical Tanks has one saltwater tank. There we go. All right. Yeah, I used to have my 220 gallon set up as a reef tank back in the day. Rico's dancing beard iron was my nickname in college. Love it. Carol Cox is curious about saltwater. All right. So typically speaking, if you're not doing sponge filters, which is funny because we talk about how much I love sponge filters for freshwater, how they're my, primary source of filtration and aeration for my tanks. But if you're not doing sponge filters, you more than likely already have what you need to get a saltwater tank set up. What's going on, Fish Tank Barn? We know Fish Tank Barn's got plenty of experience with saltwater. I'm sure he'll chime in here and there. And, you know, it's been over a decade since I've done reef tanks. I've had some saltwater. I've had some, you know, predators, the eel and things like that. But I haven't done corals in over a decade. So I'm sure Mike will chime in if he's not too busy, if he has any valuable. I know he's got valuable information. And also to correct me if I go astray somewhere. Tony's saying, hey, from London. Good to be here with all our fish friends. Absolutely. Great to have you here. Appreciate it very, very much. All right. Oh, we got 57 people, 32 thumbs up. Thank you. Very much appreciate that. Andre Ellis is saying, I had a sea cucumber, like 5 feather dusters and some flame scallops. It was an expensive food bill. Yeah, it most definitely can be. That's another thing with some of the larger predators in saltwater is you can definitely rack up a big food bill with them as well. And you've got some things not unlike freshwater that are very specialized in their feeding habits. You've got, you know, fish that typically only feed on corals. You've got things like the beautiful little mandarins, little dragonettes. You need to have a really, 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 really well-established tank with a lot of pods in it, a lot of microorganisms for those guys. You can try and supplement depending upon if you've got you know, a local fish store that sells a couple pods. You can try and supplement, but I really don't recommend it. But that's one thing I'd absolutely love to have. But that's a long way down the line for that specific fish, just because I need to have a super established tank. Paul Sotero says, if you think discus are expensive, start looking at the price of saltwater fish. Absolutely. The fish themselves, definitely, piece by piece, if you will, fish by fish, can be more expensive. Well, they are more expensive, at least pretty much everywhere I've seen. But I think that the vibrance and color, at least in my opinion, can make up for that. It's definitely enjoyable. It's not nearly as expensive to set up a saltwater. It doesn't have to be as expensive to set up a saltwater as a lot of people might think it is. And it's not nearly as difficult to take care of. Hey, Brian, how are you doing? You know, there are people that don't even use RO water. And I'm not necessarily recommending that you don't, but there are people that just use tap water. So there are a lot of different ways to go with it. And I know most of y'all have heard me equate it to the planted tanks in freshwater. You can do a very low budget planted tank with minimal accessories, minimal setup, and it worked just fine. Or you can go for the very, very high quality George Farmer-esque, you know, CO2 infused. Let's put a big fancy light on this thing. Let's dump a bunch of money into it. Kind of what you want to do. Patrick Hardy says, Fisher Fever, I played with a saltwater aquarium maybe 10 years ago. Love it. But after what happened here in Houston, no lights on water for 1 week, I would have lost everything and under 30 degrees Fahrenheit in my home. Absolutely. And that's definitely something to keep in mind. If you are in an area that suffers from a lot of storms, a lot of power failures, climate extremes, it gets really, really hot, really, really cold, keep that in mind. It is definitely easier to have a freshwater tank and maybe go a couple days without power, or they could handle some temperature swings a little bit better than salt, typically speaking. But for the most part, with the power grid being what it is, most of us are in an area that we can probably not have to worry about that too much. Good day, T-Bones. Good to see you. Appreciate you being here. Terry's Tropical Tank says the saltwater hobby is just like freshwater. It's as expensive as you want to make it. Absolutely, 100%. Great way to say that, Terry. Could not agree with you more. How's it going, Furlough? Appreciate you being here. Carol Cox says, I think it would be happy to keep a damsel. Yeah, there are a lot of beautiful fish in saltwater. So I'll tell you what I'm looking at doing, and then we can kind of talk about how you could just take the standard freshwater you have and transition it into a salt in your home if you chose to do so. And we'll kind of look at the differences in what we have. You've probably heard the term Fowler, which is FOWLR, fish only with live rock, and then reef tanks. Those are basically the two categories, if you will, that most saltwater is broken down into. Of course, there are some other variations you could do. No live rock. Some people do that. But I want you to think of live rock kind of like sponge filters almost. You're going to get a lot of biological filtration. You're going to get a lot of stuff growing on that rock. You're going to have, your coralline algae and all these little critters and creatures and all the microscopic organisms in that stuff that you want. You want to get a well-seeded tank, and live rock's definitely a great way to do that. Deborah Sanders says, if I had salt, it would be seahorses. You can't go wrong there. That's one thing I've not done. That is definitely a little bit different setup than your standard saltwater. Most of that has to do with flow, because you want minimal flow with your seahorses. You don't want them getting blown all over the place. And a lot of times you've got a fairly high turnover rate in your saltwater tanks and your reef tanks. And I just mean water turnover. Not always filtration. A lot of times that's achieved with filtration and a power head or two power heads. So seahorses would be fun, definitely. But that is absolutely something I have not dabbled in, but would definitely enjoy it. There is a store here in Knoxville that I've seen seahorses in before when I was in there. Sean Chadwick with that $3 super sticker with a thumbs up, fist bump pair. What's going on, Sean? Good to see you. Hope you're having a wonderful day, and I appreciate the super sticker, my friend. Brand's asking if I have any room for guppies. I always have room for more guppies, right? Never enough guppies. Let me go down. There we go. All right. Back where I should be at. Tony Cancillier says, Fisherman Fever, what about maintenance of a saltwater tank? Does it require more than a freshwater one? Not in my experience. That being said, when you get into reef tanks, so let me break that into the two sections, and you'll find when we talk salt that it does a lot of that. Fish only with live rock, I would say no, not really. A reef tank, it most definitely can be, but is not always necessary. Kind of going back to, it can be as difficult as you want it to be or as expensive as you want it to be. So, you can set up, if you're going to do, and I won't get into a whole lot of the different technical types of corals and things, but we'll just say some of the more demanding corals, kind of you have more demanding plants and you have beginner plants. You go on Aquarium Co-op and you can look at what that level is. Is it easy? Is it medium? Beginner, intermediate, advanced, and the same thing is with applies to corals. So it doesn't have to be. And honestly, that's one of the things I love about zoanthids. And let me pull up, and I see some more super chats coming in. I'll definitely get to those and all the highlighted stuff as well. But let me pull up zoanthids just in case you all are not familiar with those, so you can see how beautiful these things are and all the varieties. It's amazing how many different varieties you can get. Some of them really expensive, some of them not too bad. Let's go to images here. And then I'm going to move my chat and share my screen. Boom. Thinking about it. Share screen. All right. Zoanthids. And if you hear me say zoas, that's what I'm talking about is zoanthids. But let's get over here and scroll. Look at the color varieties you can get. And so this right here is, what I'm going for in the long run is the large colonies of polyps. So polyp being one of these little heads here. So that's here, this one's easier. That's 4 polyps there, maybe 5. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't think there's a 5th one under there. But you get this large colony here of the greens, and then you get the purples and oranges. A lot of really, really, really beautiful colors. And some of these are expensive. So, Mike, you're probably a lot more up on prices. but I'm pretty sure that there's, you know, some that are easily $150 a polyp if you get into the super high end, you know, like way up there. But you could find cheaper stuff, and it's easy to get deals from time to time if you're looking. Let me get my chat back up here. We'll leave that rolling over here, and we'll have our chat here. There we go. The Zoa Garden. Absolutely, Terry. Absolutely. What's going on, S? Good to see you. All right. Furlough's Aquatics with the $5 super chat with the party pair. What's going on, Furlough? Hope you're doing well, brother. Hope you're having a great day. I kind of poked my head in on your early morning stream. I didn't say anything, but I was half asleep, so I just kind of poked my head in there. Mike's Aquatics and Things, what's going on? I saw you hanging out on somebody's panel last night. I cannot remember where it was, but enjoyed seeing the conversation y'all were having. Maybe it was the night before. I don't know. Didn't sleep last night. Things kind of blend together. But thank you for the $1 super sticker with the halo, the angelic smiley face. Very much appreciate that. This is what I miss the most out of having corals. In terms of, back to that question and giving a little bit deeper answer with, is it harder than freshwater to maintain? If you go with the high end, so we'll say like SPS and LPS, which is small polyp stony and large polyp stony. If you get into some of those things, it can be a lot like if you've got a high-end plant where you're having to dose very specific fertilizers and CO2 injection and things of that nature. That's right. It was Furlough's stream. That's right. It certainly can be. And that's what I would compare it to. You can get into the corals. It's like having the really, really fancy, high-end, demanding planted tank. These guys, the zoanthids, really not hard. Now, I will say you've got a couple of things that I would recommend for beginners, and I think we'll hold off on that for a second. We'll get to that here in a minute. Keep in mind, I'm kind of winging this. I had some other things planned with Ed tonight, but we're just rolling with the punches and having some fun, right? So, it doesn't have to be. On my fish-only tanks, fish-only with live rock, saltwater tanks, you know, a lot of times I've even done those with tap water. Now, that's going to depend on what your tap water is like. You definitely, I know Mike's probably cringing, but you definitely run into a lot of algae issues and things using tap water. Phosphates is a huge thing, and salt, and some other things as well. But it's also doable. I've also seen some people who have water that's, I don't want to say pure, but it's good enough that they've been maintaining really nice reef aquariums with that. Generally speaking, though, I'm going to recommend that you do RO water, and that's not as big of a deal as you might think it is. There are a couple options. You've got RO, which reverse osmosis, or RODI, reverse osmosis deionization setups that you can get fairly cheap now. You order them on Amazon, you know, hook it up at the house, make your own RO water. You also have most, not all, local fish stores sell water. And that's typically what I go with. I have got some big 5-gallon jugs up on this tank behind me. And just whenever I need a water change, I go up there and go, hey, you know, fill these up. And if you're doing a 10% water change, even if you've got a 100-gallon tank, that's 2 jugs of water. You know, usually about $1 a gallon. That's going to vary depending upon where you're at. But $10 knocks it out. You don't have to buy the salt. You don't have to mix the salt. You don't have to worry about getting that right, assuming that you've got a local fish store that is on par with doing that. And yes, Fish Tank Barn says one thing to keep in mind with zoas is palytoxin. Yes, so zoanthids and palythoas, which are similar to zoanthids, but in my opinion, not quite as pretty, but they get a little bit bigger, do have palytoxin. Fish Tank Barn, I know, did a lot, talked about it, has talked about it several times in live streams. I think he might have a video. Mike, if you've got a video and you want to throw a link up, by all means, feel free to do so. I know that you probably wouldn't do it without me saying too, just because you're not a big self-promoter. But if you've got a video about palytoxin, or if you want to throw up the link where you were talking about, I feel 100% positive you did a live stream about a news article where somebody had issues with palytoxins. So feel free to throw that in there. Absolutely. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole. There are some basics that we won't get into tonight, just because anybody that's not the least bit interested in saltwater would be bored to death, whereas maybe you're not necessarily interested in saltwater for sure, but you might want to just kind of listen to the basic similarities and what you might need to know. But yeah, that would be my recommendation. If you're going to set up a saltwater tank and you are new to it and you have the option, I would just go ahead and buy the salt water or RO water from your pet store. So your RO water is typically going to be used for top offs, just maintaining the water level and, wow, I've lost the word, taking care of the evaporation, compensating for the evaporation. Or if you're going to mix your own salt water, in which case there are a couple different things to measure that, and we could get into that at a different time unless anybody has questions about it. But if you're new to it, I would personally recommend you just go ahead and purchase the salt water from your local fish store. You don't have to worry about mixing it. And it's going to give you an easier transition into it versus going, oh God, now I have to figure out how to mix this. The salinity level varies depending upon temperature and this, that, and the other. And so buy the salt water. That would be my recommendation to make life easier. Now, if you're somebody that doesn't mind the challenge, you like to tinker with things and learn exactly how things work from the get-go, you could do the RO, mix your own salt. You could get little boxes of salt. You could get big boxes of salt. But then you've also got this box of salt sitting around. So keep that in mind as well. And that's not salt that you're typically going to be using for anything in the freshwater side, excluding, making brine shrimp. A lot of people use marine salt for that. Tony, I don't remember if I got yours or not. I don't think I did. If I did, you get another thank you. If not, Tony Cancillier with the $3 thumbs up fist bump pair. What's going on, Tony? Fist bump to you. Appreciate that. Very, very much so. Can't get a hold of these little strings tonight. So I hope that answered your question in enough depth. We could go probably just on that for an entire hour. But I want to get into a couple of the basics. So real quick, what I've decided to do, for those of you that watched my most recent video where the string stuck to me, I said I took down my tanks, which I did take down some tanks. I have the 90-gallon Reef Ready tank, which I've built a stand for, and it is actually plumbed into the 100-gallon directly below it. I'm going to get a drink real quick. Do me a favor, smash that thumbs up if you're getting value, if you're having a good time, or if you're just enjoying watching me squirm around on my own, unprepared, so to speak. Hit that like button. I very much appreciate it. Paul, I will grab that here in a second. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to do a 90 and a 100-gallon salt. Now, the biggest reason for that is the plumbing. The 90-gallon that sits above it, it's already got the built-in overflow. It's already plumbed to run down into the 100-gallon, which I will do some tinkering with that. If I do convert it to salt, I'll probably set up a wet-dry trickle system, and I'll make a video on how I do that, if I do that. But my biggest fear is if I set up the 90-gallon salt, and even if I plumb it off to the side and set up a sump, which I don't really have room to do, given how close the tanks are in that room, because I spread everything out so I could enjoy it more. My biggest fear is that salt water, having a leak, and then I come back and all this salt water from the top has gone into this freshwater tank and killed whatever fish end up in that freshwater tank down below it. It also gives a wonderful opportunity to have a reef tank and a Fowler tank. what I would like to do, my plan is to take the 90-gallon tank that's up top and do a reef tank there. I think that'll look really, really, really nice. And then I can do my fish only with live rock down in the bottom. So if you're wondering why I would do that, there are a lot of fish that are not considered reef safe, meaning they will eat corals and things of that nature. So you get some really, really pretty fish. Oh, I'd like to have that, but I don't want it munching on my corals. And that kind of gives you the best of both worlds. It'll allow me to keep some things that I can't have in the reef tank. One of the biggest, I don't want to say most important, but one of the biggest things it's going to do is it's going to give me a lot more water volume. And when it comes to saltwater, that's an area where people really get into that, understandably, because we know the bigger your area of water, the larger water volume you have, the less things swing. So, if you have whatever spike, and we won't get into all the dosing things with reefs, but things are going to fluctuate a lot less in 190 gallons worth of water versus a 10-gallon. So you'll see a lot of times in salt, people might have, a 10 or a 20-gallon cube or just standard tank. And then they'll have a sump that's just as big, if not bigger, down below. So they're doubling, if not more than doubling, the water volume in there to help maintain things and keep things from dramatically swinging. Let's see. Paul Sotero says, James, I got some bad news from my cruise director today. We've got house guests coming in for Easter weekend, so that means no Carolina Aquatic Expo for me. Cursey face. Paul, I'm sorry to hear that. I really, really am. That stinks. I'm sure we will bump into you, though, at some point. Fish Tank Barn's going to take me into a ditch. Yeah, absolutely. This is one of those things, Mike, that if I had known that I was really going to dive into this, I would have said, hey, you want to come hang out? And, I'll just throw it out there, no pressure. But if you wanted to come up and talk, you're welcome to do so. If not, by all means, don't feel obligated or pressured to. I just know that you've been in the saltwater game a long time. You've got a lot of salt. And I've been out of the hobby, or I've been out of the saltwater side, coral specifically, for about a decade. But the basics are still kind of there. Same with freshwater. You've used your filtration and stuff like that. So that's my plan. That's what I'm doing. I will probably need to do a lighting upgrade for corals. And a big part of that is a 90-gallon tank. It's a fair bit deeper than a 75. Zoanthids are not super, super light demanding. And the great thing about having all that live rock in there, which is going to help with biological filtration, is that I'll have different light levels. So one of the things you can do with salt water, with having that live rock in there, is, if you've got something that needs to be closer to the light, you can get it kind of higher up on your reef, kind of get it higher up on those rocks. If you've got something that you wants less light, you don't want to burn it out, you can get it lower down in the water column away from those lights. But let's move into, what do I need to set one up? Can I change over my current setup? Because I do get that from time to time. People say, well, I have this aquarium and this filter. I've never done salt before. Will this work? Typically, yes. You're not going to want to take a sponge filter or an air stone and throw them in your saltwater tank. Unless, now on the air stone, unless something's changed in the hobby and they've come up with some different research from back in the day. Back in my day, we didn't run air stones in saltwater tanks. You didn't want the micro bubbles in there and all that stuff. But if you've got a hang-on back, you can, yeah, absolutely. You can set up a saltwater. If you've got a canister, you're doing even better. You're good to go. You got a canister filter, set that bad boy up. If you've got a sump, perfect. Don't have to have a sump, but that's kind of the status quo, if you will. And I may or may not have one. I will do a lot of flow. Oh, look at who decided to show up. Look at this guy with the beautiful red beard. What's going on, buddy?
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry.
Hey, that's all right. I've been winging it. And we're talking about setting up saltwater tanks.
Holy cow, well, I'm glad I got here so I can add some input.
Absolutely. So I was right now where I'm at is we were talking about, people will message me from time to time and say, "Hey, I have this tank and it's got my freshwater filter. Can I set it up?" You don't really want to do a sponge and an air stone in a saltwater, but if you've got hang on back, you're good to go essentially. Canisters are good. Sumps are great. The title, Bob Kaler's Aquatics. He lives by those things on his saltwater tanks, man. I've seen Bob clear a shelf when we've gone to pet stores and go, "Can you put these on the counter for me?" To an employee, not to me. Not that I wouldn't carry Bob's stuff up and put it on the counter for him or give him a hand with it, but I've seen him clear out a shelf of, "I need these." He lives and dies by those titles.
Yeah, he's the reason why I would have confidence to do a saltwater.
Absolutely. It's really not as tricky as you might think. Some of the variances are your substrate. You're really going to want to do live sand, and that's going to be the big thing. I don't even know if I want to put this out there because I don't necessarily want people trying it and thinking it's a good idea.
Yeah.
No, we're not even going to put that out there. That's not a beginner thing to even consider. So forget I was even talking about it. A specific substrate thing that you can do, but I don't really recommend it unless you know exactly what you're doing. Just go buy live sand. Go buy live sand. You're not going to regret it. This is one of those areas that I typically, and Daniel Velez, that is a very good point. I remember when airstone was used for countercurrent protein skimmer. So that's the only time I've ever seen an airstone in saltwater. Again, back in my day, was in my protein skimmer. It was a little wooden block airstone that was used. Other than that, dropping an airstone in the tank was really, a lot of times that was a good way to get crucified. All right, so we're going to have Mike from the Fish Tank Barn. I appreciate you. Mike's going to come on up because he is a saltwater guy.
Wow.
Let me throw this link in here. Actually, Mike, if you're good, I'm going to send it to your messenger. That way it's not in the chat, and we don't, not that we really ever have issues with trolls, but have people backstage doing inappropriate things because they decided that they found a great place to troll. Like, no, I got you in here. Oh, that's because I'm searching your name under messages instead of two. There he is. All right, I sent that link to your messenger, Mike.
Messenger Mike.
Messenger Mike.
Mike from the Fish Tank Barn.
Yeah, so again, going back to your substrate, live sand. And what do I mean by live sand if you're not familiar with that? And there's Mike. Let me add him in here. And I'm going to knock this off of the stream.
Well, this was a great stream for me to accidentally sleep through.
Right? Hey, not a problem.
Yeah, I had a migraine today. Well, I still have a splitting headache. But I set my alarm to go off at 6:30, and I just naturally woke up, and I was like, "Boy, it's dark outside." Hi, Mike.
I've got no audio from Mike. Do you hear Mike?
No.
Let me get rid of that. Do you hear Mike?
Is this better now?
Yeah, I've got you now.
All right, you change settings. I got whatever reason, anytime I pull something up, I have 16 different microphones.
I understand. I've got 4 cameras. None of them really work great, but I understand.
Now? Well,
yeah, I've got you now.
Whoa. All right, you change settings. I got whatever reason, anytime I pull something up, I have 16 different microphones. All right, hold on.
I've got 4 cameras. None of them really work great, but I understand. Well, yeah, I've got you now. The infinite loop. I love it. I appreciate you coming up spur of the moment like that. I really do.
Not a problem.
Is it okay if I get some pop?
Yeah, go right ahead, buddy. Do you want to talk to him, Mike, about substrate and why you want to go with live sand versus maybe transitioning your gravel over and trying something like that? And in your opinion, why you may want to go with new live sand or at least a trusted source versus just getting some from a guy on Craigslist?
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what's in it. And the thing is, first of all, you can't really use your gravel. It's just, I mean, one, it's just not done, and two, it's really the live sand has all the bacteria and everything for the salt in it. It's a different bacteria, but it's the same cycle.
Yeah.
And so you're basically going to want to get that live sand, get it in your tank, and it'll help kickstart your cycle a little bit as well. It's the same thing as getting sand from a friend in freshwater. It does the same thing as this kickstarts your cycle.
Absolutely. Which is thus the live sand is what I was getting to. Yeah, you could definitely run into hitchhikers in the sand. You can get, bristle worms, which we may pull up a picture of those here in a second. But you can get nasty things that will eat your corals in sand and live rock and stuff. So you do want to kind of be careful. I know I always am advocating on the freshwater side, finding used stuff, finding deals. But not that you can't do that, and not that I haven't done that, but you definitely want to be careful when you do it. You can bring in a lot of crazy hitchhikers in the saltwater side of things.
Yep. I remember the old days of the live rock where you could get, when it came from the ocean, you'd get all kinds of stuff. Like I had some crazy looking amphipod that came in mine. It looked like a alien creature. I think I sent that to you guys, I think the last time I was on here.
Yeah.
It was like an alien amphipod.
Yeah, it's you never know what you're going to get when you get into that stuff.
A lot of it. Oh, go ahead, James. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say I had my chat down while we were getting adjusted, and then I popped it up. Look at Mary Beth McCubbins. She's left me speechless. With a $50 super chat, says, "I just wanted to thank everyone in the Fish Fam. You all have kept my spirits up these last few months. Could not think of a better place to share my great news. My husband was declared cancer-free yesterday. Knock on wood, it stays that way."
That's awesome.
Thank you for that super chat, but more importantly, congratulations. That is phenomenal. I've had a lot of family members go through that. So that declaration is absolutely amazing. And I couldn't be happier for you. And I appreciate you sharing that with us.
That is awesome.
Congratulations to you all. That really is wonderful. There's no feeling like that when that comes through. And thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it, Mary Beth, and I'm so glad to hear that. I really, really am.
I think that one of the keys with saltwater is it's just to understand the ecosystem of it. Really spend the time, learn the cycle, learn the ecosystem. And I would almost recommend, if you're new, just keep the fish for a year.
Absolutely.
And don't get into the corals until you just take it slow. And you got to take it a lot slower than freshwater.
Yes. And that's one thing. A lot of times, with freshwater, we'll throw a sponge filter over and we'll go, boom, we've got a cycle tank. And a lot of times that gets confused for established anyways in fresh. But really, you can walk into a fish store and on the saltwater side of things, go, "Oh, my tank's been set up for a year." And they're like, "Well, that's still a brand new tank. That's not even established yet." Whereas in freshwater, a lot of people don't even leave their tanks the same for a year. 12 months later, they've broken it down and started a new setup, or they've changed the fish or changed the substrate. So patience, absolutely. That's a wonderful thing to point out, giving it a lot of time. So let's see. I want to set up saltwater. I've got this, we'll say 55-gallon tank. I've got an AquaClear hang on back. We've talked about I need to go get some live sand. I guess the next thing that we would segue to is some live rock. You going to tell them a little bit about what the recommendations are for live rock and why we want to have it in there?
It's like your sponge filter. I think you mentioned it earlier. It's very much like your sponge, where it holds all the beneficial bacteria, holds all the nutrients. And that's why you almost, at some point, you do want to graduate to a sump, because you can put a lot of the live rock into the sump, and that way it'll serve as your filtration system. That way, holding the bacteria in the sump, and you can even have a more minimalistic aquascape in the main display tank.
Absolutely.
And there was a buddy of mine when I was more involved in the Saltwater Club that he had it was like a 225 gallon tank with literally like 400 gallons of sump down in his basement. And you guys were talking about the air driven skimmer. Mm-hmm. And some guys at the Saltwater Club had actually built the air driven protein skimmer. And it was literally about as tall as the ceiling in here.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's awesome. Yeah, I know Corey, in one of his China tours of looking at the fish markets, he's walking past a skimmer and it's taller than he is. He's like, check this out. And that's not an uncommon thing when you get into the big fancy setups as massive skimmers. I've been backstage or behind the scenes, if you will, in the maintenance area of Ripley's Aquarium up in Gatlinburg here. And I mean, they've got skimmers that look like, smokestacks or, whatever you want. The big towers, like, oh my goodness.
They're probably I think they're called like RK2s or something like that. They're like big monster skimmers. That's one thing too, is that's like the one piece of equipment for someone coming from freshwater that's like foreign, right?
Yes, absolutely.
It's a very foreign. So basically what it does is the salt water will react with the bubbles created by the skimmer, and that will flow out into the collection cup, and it will actually filter your tank. That's a very basic discussion of how it works, but that's the basic idea.
Absolutely. And what that's doing is it's pulling proteins out of the water. Right. So if you're looking, you'll look at a protein skimmer, not to be confused with the surface skimmer, because they're two different things. One simply cleaning the top layer of water, and the other is actually
here. Bring this right here.
There we go.
Actually, I don't have the top on it.
Right.
This is a protein skimmer I've been a long time since I've used it. But basically, it has a pump right here. Let me get it on camera here. So it has this pump that sits in the water. This is an external skimmer, so it'll actually be fed by a pipe here from your system. But basically, and then it feeds air through this hose right here. Sorry, and basically that's how it filters the water. It creates the bubbles and the proteins stick to it, and then it comes up this collection top, and then there's a top on this where it actually collects, and then you can actually drain it out of your system.
So, okay, here is a guy who has no clue on anything. How is the protein made?
It's your fish waste.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So it's your fish waste. So it basically sticks to the bubbles, and then as it bubbles out over the skimmer, it will basically collect in a collection cup, which I don't have on it right now, and then it'll just basically drain out. It is literally the nastiest stuff you could ever smell in your life.
It is. It really is. Now, I will say, and this was always I don't want to say an arguing point, but you had kind of opposite sides of this. You can run a lot of setups without a protein skimmer, assuming you're doing the water changes. When you get into nicer setups, though, and you're getting into the more advanced corals and fancy things, you really want to have a protein skimmer. But then you're also probably getting into dosing and a lot of things we're not going to talk about tonight.
Oh, yeah. There's a big rabbit hole.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you have corals and not fish and not have a protein? Or do you have to have a protein if you have coral?
You could run it without a protein skimmer, but like James said, you have to do water changes and have a very light stocking level.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you can have just a coral only tank, but for me, I'm a fish guy, so it's kind of, even in saltwater, it's kind of boring for me to have it.
Right. And you can do hang-on protein skimmers. So that might be the one piece of hardware that you're really needing. Again, not 100%. And they even have CoreLife marine filter with built-in protein skimmer, a hang-on back. Let me pull this up. Let me share this. I had not seen this filter before. You're probably familiar with it, but I hadn't seen it. They didn't have these back when I was around, so to speak. But I will say I personally have done several tanks in the past without protein skimmers.
I have too.
And when you're just getting into it, I'm going to say, again, we're starting out slow. You're letting things get established. You're probably not going to add any corals into that thing for minimum 6 months on your first tank. In that time, you don't really need to have a protein skimmer so much.
Right.
So don't hesitate to transition over because you don't have a protein skimmer currently.
Yeah, and one of the things that I run, like a lot of the clownfish breeding setups that I have that are upstairs in the barn, I run those on basically on the Zist filters from Aquarium Co-op.
Oh, very nice.
And those are great for that. And then I do have a skimmer on it and a sump, but each one of the tanks does have a little Zist filter in it as well.
So here are some hang-on skimmers. So let's say that you're not doing a sump. Room doesn't permit it. Whatever your setup is, you're not going to be able to work in a sump. You've got your hang-on back, and then you could add one of these hang-on skimmers. Or I'm seeing this guy here, $40. It's a marine hang-on filter with built-in protein skimmer. So there's some options out there. But
there are. And especially if you do the nano tanks, they've built a lot more things for nano tanks now.
Yeah, and see, that's something that I am not up to the times with, because like the big thing for nano tanks a decade ago, at least in my area, was just you had a sump underneath it. You might have a 10-gallon display nano tank with a 20-gallon sump or a 29-gallon sump underneath the thing, and then you had your protein skimmer sitting down inside that sump.
I have a saltwater nano, and it has a sock on the back.
Mm-hmm. That's
And I mean, I use it freshwater, so I just filled the sock with bio balls. But is that salt or sock? Is that somehow catching the protein?
It's the same as like filter floss almost. Like, is it like a felt material, or is it like a bag, more like a drawstring bag?
It's a felt type material.
It's a felt. So what that does is it acts almost like your sponge filters, where basically your return from your tank would drain into that sock.
Mm-hmm.
That sock would collect all of the waste, and then you can go ahead and wash that sock with bleach in your wash machine, and you can reuse that sock over and over again.
So I thought I had a filter sock nearby. They're not nearly as commonly used in freshwater, but having done salt before, I still have like some of that. I'm got a hang-on filter sock holder right over here that I'll put in this tank a lot, down at the bottom with the filter sock, just to help clear the water. But yeah. So
yeah, I have a lot too hanging around.
Yeah, that's what I'm like. I'm surprised I don't have one. But just in your basics of things. So I've got a 55-gallon tank with an aqua clear. I'm going to get some live sand. I'm going to get some live rock. I know it used to typically be the recommendation was minimum of 1 pound per gallon. Try to go to 2 to 3 pounds per gallon of live rock to get the appropriate biological filtration. I don't know if they're going by that rule of thumb anymore, so to speak.
Not so much, but it's especially there was a lot of minimalist aquascapes out there now, but you can still put that, I mean, they're still recommending that, but you can still put it in your sump is a lot of what people are saying now.
Absolutely. I'm
not as close to it as I used to be, but they're still, you still want that filtration in some way, somehow.
Absolutely. Definitely. So I'm going to grab a couple things from the chat. Let me roll back through here. All right. Patrick Hardy says, talking about going to the ocean for sand. So I've never done that. I'm too far away. I will say, assuming that it's not violating any laws, which I know that some places I've heard it mentioned that they can't do that. Assuming that you can do so legally, I have seen some people do that. And I would definitely, if I lived near saltwater, I would probably have some sort of setup that was running like that. And then running water through, again, depending upon legalities and all that wonderful stuff. But have you ever done any of that, Mike?
No, I always bought sand. I mean, I'm in Michigan, so it's the ocean's away.
Right.
I mean, I could go to Lake Michigan or to Lake Huron or Lake Erie and get sand, but you don't, one, that's, I don't know the legalities of it, and two, buying the live sand is just buying the right stuff.
Right.
This is something where, especially when you're investing the money into saltwater systems like that, you need to really buy the right stuff.
You really do. I was going to make a joke. We've got the Bago Beach that Ed and I dug through that has like the fossilized shark teeth and stuff. Just buy like 100 bags of that and use it, and then you don't have to go to the beach. That's already been collected from the beach for you.
You're right. No, the funny thing is I think the one thing we didn't talk about was lighting.
Yes, absolutely. Go right ahead.
And you really do want to spend, I mean, don't go out and buy you'll hear some people, on various platforms, forums, etc., talk about getting the the Ecotech Radeon, $700 light, etc. But you do want to have a good light. I mean, you do want to make sure you get the correct spectrum so you don't get algae, stuff like that. I mean, you want to get something. I always liked like 1200K personally, which is more of a blue compared to like your freshwater is normally about 6500, 5500.
Absolutely.
But definitely do your research on lighting, especially because it's definitely needed for corals. Look at PAR and PER, which is PAR. Saturday, what is it? It's crap. I'm having a brain fart of what it is.
Oh Lord, I haven't looked at PAR in forever because
it's something radiation. Like it's something useful. PER is something useful radiation.
Because in freshwater we kind of got away from PAR,
and I don't remember what it is at the top of my head.
I think Bentley was talking about it not too long ago. He's like, we really don't look at PAR anymore. It's kind of essentially useless in freshwater with the LEDs that we have and stuff. But no, lighting is definitely a big thing with the salt. You are going to go with the more blue or more actinic than what you're used to with your freshwater tanks. And oh, gotcha. I'll scroll down and find it here in a second. There's a question I want to get to, but there are some what you could consider budget lights. And what I mean by that is there's a gentleman, I'm going to have to find this gentleman's channel because it's the same guy that does the reef tank with tap water. He's got some quote unquote budget LEDs on that. And he's doing, this won't mean a lot to other people, but he's doing LPS and SPS. And he's got the budget LEDs off Amazon, but it's like a $220 budget LED, but it equates to like a $1,200 LED if you were to go name brand.
Yeah, there's a lot of black box, kind of like, there's even like Aquaneat and stuff like that have reef lights as well.
Absolutely. So that is something, like Mike said, I recommend that you research it. There are cheaper lighting options, but know what you're getting into before you go with cheap lighting. This again is contrary to what I tell you all the time in freshwater, where I just run 4-foot shop lights, LED shop lights. I'm not going to recommend you do that on your tank in saltwater. But there are definitely a lot of LED options, and I think that's great. I'm looking forward to that personally because LED was still really new on the salt side, over a decade ago. It was expensive. I'll put it that way. Maybe not new, but it was expensive. So I still have a 4-foot T8 fixture that runs 6 T8 bulbs that I've got over here. Not going to be using that, but I at one point had a 72-inch light on my 200-gallon 220, and it had like 8 or 12 3-foot bulbs in it, and then it had 3 metal halides. Which if you've never used those, they have this big block with them. And
it was a big, it was like what is that? The ballast, the big ballast.
Yeah, the big ballast. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh God, I remember those things were scary.
Yeah, they were. They'd come on and you could hear it, and it was like the spotlights on the street lighting up. And I swear that thing was $100 a month to run on the power bill. So I'm really looking forward. Yeah,
on my 180, it was scary. I think it was like all of a sudden it was like, nah, you hear the
and that was the same because it had 3 of those plus all the other T8 bulbs in it, and it was just like when it would power up, and you're like, okay, and that's all the cooling fans kicking in and the bulb warming up. But I'm really looking forward to being able to play with LED on corals and saltwater.
Yeah, I did a little bit, and I bought the really black box ones, and I got annoyed with one of them because it had like 3 different cords to it, and it was kind of a nightmare. But like, just research your lighting, and it'll definitely make do it. So you do it once, like, because otherwise you can keep buying, and at some point you've spent enough where you could have bought the $700 light fixture.
Absolutely, and that's one of those things that I would recommend. While you're in that minimum 6-month period, I've taken my 55, I've bought the sand and the rock, I've got this hang on back filter running. Things are kind of going well. Maybe I've gone and I've bought a couple of damsels to put in there, to kind of kick things off. Keep in mind, those things are mean little damsels are like the convicts of the saltwater world, is how I always looked at it.
There are pound for pound probably some of the mean, other than dotty backs from saltwater. They're pound for pound probably the meanest fish you can find.
And they are a sucker to try and catch out of that tank when you go to want them out of there to get other fish in. But that first period where you're waiting, don't look at it as, oh God, I'm bored, I'm stuck here waiting. Look at that as an opportunity to be researching, be looking into that lighting system, because you're still at the point that you don't really need to have the advanced coral light and all that stuff. Be looking into your lighting, be looking into how heavily am I going to stock it? Do I need to do a protein skimmer? And then Patrick Hardy, and I know this is a while ago, sorry, Patrick, I'm just out getting to it. But Patrick Hardy had said, I'm still using an Eheim's canister filter on one of my aquariums, and it used to belong to my uncle. Very old and strong, made in West Germany. Absolutely awesome filters. Oh, kitty cats. Kitties.
Oh, that one got away. We're tough. So
such cute kitties.
So one of the things that's happened, and I've not really told anyone, is that I've been doing a lot of work in the barn, and I've been.
Cleo.
I know it looks exactly like Cleo, and I've moved my studio space into the house, and so now we have cat access now.
That's awesome.
To the studio. So this is Lucky, and he's 3. And this one is Cleo if he decides to stay.
Oh,
so
cute guys.
And he looks like Ed's cat.
Yep, like Neo.
And the older one is around somewhere else. They're like, what are you people doing to us? Didn't realize this was an OnlyFans stream.
I'm going to grab a couple of things from the chat. I see we've got a super chat there. And then we'll just kind of do a quick wrap up on the basics of what we really need and what you should focus on. Pegasus Arena with $5 super chat says, just finished moving both tanks. Wish I could join stream to show everyone. We need to work it out so you can come hang out one day. I want to do an open panel stream. I'll probably do it on a different day than my Thursdays or Saturdays, and we can all just kind of hang out and rotate people and have a good time. But Rena, I appreciate you. Congratulations on getting those moved, and I hope all the fish and everything are doing well. See, Pew Fish Zone says, Fish Room Fever, they always say salt requires more work than fresh, and it's not as forgiving as fresh. I don't, I'm going to say I disagree. And the only reason I say that is because you can make it as difficult or as easy as you want to. And you can do that with fresh. You know, you can do like Ed and I do and just kind of throw plants in a tank with some, you know, lower end setups, or you can go super high tech where you're dosing stuff and you've got a $400 Kessel and you've got CO2 and you've got all the things going on. In terms of forgiving, I really think that goes back to water volume more than fresh versus salt. You know, a 10 gallon is always going to be less forgiving than a 100 gallon, you know, and it goes to dilution is really what you're looking at. If I take and I drop 5 mLs of bleach in a 5 gallon tank with no dechlorinator, that's going to have a lot more adverse effects than if I were to dump that into a 100 gallon tank. Whereas it might get dispersed enough that it didn't cause harm in a 100 gallon. I'm not saying do it. Please don't try it unless you're, you know, do that at your own risk. But it comes down to dilution, you know, looking at parts per million and whatnot. So that's my big thing on the forgiveness level.
Yeah, absolutely. I will tell you, I'll have a little bit of a story. Is I used to have the saltwater, my big saltwater reef tank in here, and it so happened that the shower was above the vent for the shower was above the sump, and someone knocked soap over, and the soap kept dripping down the vent into the basement into the sump.
Oh no!
And I look at the skimmer, and there's soap like everywhere, going, and the fish were fine. The fish were absolutely nothing. I lost no fish in this. The skimmer had gotten all the soap out of the water. But it was one of those lucky moments. I'm like, why is it doing this? And I look, and I can see the little soap dripping down.
That's crazy.
To the vent. Like,
that is crazy. But yeah, and you know, the fact that you didn't lose anything, you know, I'm sure that that skimmer played a huge part, like you mentioned, and then also dilution levels. How much of it was in how much water volume. And there, I did get to dank tanks and mention PAR, which PAR, photosynthetic active radiation, and Paul Satera coming in with PUR or PUR is the photosynthetic useful radiation. So there you go. All right, let me get caught up here. I know we've got Jeff Rose coming up. He may have already started. Jeff Rose, I'm sorry. I know I'm going a couple minutes over. I usually try and kill it on time. But Terry says we're making it way harder than it is. So yeah, so essentially it's really not. And that's why I kind of want to recap, because there's so many rabbit holes. I see I missed a super sticker from Halo Fins and Flora. Thank you for that, for the $3 rocking out hippo. I like that snazzy outfit that hippo's got on there. Very much appreciate that, Halo. And all right, I think I'm caught up. I don't think I missed anybody. So just to recap, let's do basics. Again, I'm just using the 55-gallon tank. I got a 55. It's got an aqua clear hang on back. I'm going to go get my live sand. I'm going to get some live rock. And one thing I do want to say with the live rock is you can kind of do that bit by bit. Live rock can be expensive. Don't hesitate to add it little by little. Don't look and go, oh my goodness, I need to buy 50 pounds of live rock. I can't afford to get all. Oh, Jeff Rose canceled tonight. Oh, well, then if you're good, we can talk about this a little bit more.
We can go for as long as you want.
All right, there we go. Well, good.
What about rock like this?
It's sort of, that looks almost kind of like it.
It does.
If you want, I can give me a second. I can run outside and grab a piece.
Yeah,
this is saltwater rock.
I'll be right back.
Alrighty. So yeah, back to we're making it sound more complicated than it is. It can be as difficult or as easy you want it to be. It literally. So, just my experience, what I've done, I've literally taken a tank, thrown the live sand in there, toss the live rock in there, use tap water and mix the salt in the tank. And these are not necessarily recommendations, but this is how easy it can be. Mixed it in the tank and let it sit and let it start curing, if you will. It can be that simple. It really, really can be. And a lot of us probably have an LED light that would be sufficient, at least to start with, that we could run. So it can be that easy. It really can be. In terms of cycling, like Mike mentioned, it's very much the same process. Very much, nitrogen cycle, learning that stuff. If you're already familiar with how the nitrogen cycle works, you've got a foot up in the game, if you will. There's different bacteria, and that's what I want to emphasize. Whereas in freshwater, we might take a filter from one tank to another tank so that we can start that cycle. It is a different beneficial bacteria in saltwater. And they may have researched this more and found something I'm not aware of in the past decade. But as far as I'm familiar with, and as far as I've researched and seen, there's not a beneficial bacteria that transitions from freshwater to saltwater. So keep that in mind. It's not going to be like, oh, I'm taking the cycled hang on back that I had in fresh, and now my saltwater is cycled. That, in theory, would help it cycle in the scientific sense that what you're going to do is kill the freshwater beneficial bacteria, which is going to get your ammonia spike going, which is then going to start your saltwater beneficial bacteria growth. So it's kind of like dosing ammonia to get your cycle started, or feeding the invisible fish in a no fish cycle. So in theory, it would help in that way, but it's not going to be, oh, I have living freshwater beneficial bacteria and now they're living in my saltwater. Pew Fish Son says, Fisher Fever, maybe it's just the cost. I would love to do salt, but the cost is so much on fish. So I essentially got my salt tank set up for free off of Craigslist. And that's the whole reason I got back into doing any salt last year. There was a gentleman that had a 72-gallon Beaufront tank with I don't know, 80 pounds of live sand and 100 plus pounds of live rock and all the things and the LED light and the canister filter. And it was, I think, like $175. He just wanted it gone. So that was all that stuff essentially came with it free. And that was one of those cases where I went into it knowing there could potentially be hitchhikers in the rock and the sand and stuff. But for the cost, that was cheaper than I would have paid for just buying the live rock for the amount that he had in there. So you can find some deals. What I would recommend, if you're going to get somebody else's live rock and you don't know who they are, you're not familiar with the source, I would probably put it in like a tub, a big Rubbermaid tub, with some sort of water circulation in there, throw a power head in there, throw some sort of agitation in there. And just so you can kind of see what comes out of it, just to kind of make sure that you're not, I'd say not throwing it in with your corals and stuff, but you really won't have to worry about it when you're first setting it up. It's really more of an issue when you're adding it to your existing setup, kind of like quarantining. Live rock, you can very much quarantine, if you will. But Mike's got some live rock there, and then we've got some live rock questions as well.
Yep. So let me see here. I've got two different examples. So this is your basic. There's a company called Marco Rocks that gets a lot of this, but it's basically, and all the little pores in here is where all the bacteria. It probably won't focus. Is where all the bacteria will live. And then there's a company that makes like more purpley colored stuff as well.
Right. Now,
and so what you would do is you'd put this as kind of your base, and then you would kind of cover it with this as you did your aquascape.
Right. Now, the reason, at least this is my thought process. The purple I always thought was just to mimic coralline algae, because that's kind of what you're going for. Is you want to get that purple coralline algae growth in your live rock.
Correct.
And it's not just for the beneficial bacteria. It's also for the microorganisms. It gives lots of hiding area for microorganisms, copepods, those type of things. All the little bitty critters and creatures and wonderful things. Let me get up here because we did have some really good questions.
This rock is made for saltwater also.
That's what I say, Ed. It really looks like a live rock that's just been sliced into layers.
That's what it is, and you can stack it any way you want. It makes it really cool.
I like that
to do for your paints.
All right, so Mike's Aquatics and Things says, live rock, dried or manufactured, pros and cons of each.
There's really not a lot of live out there anymore, like live. Like they used to do it in the ocean, but due to like environmental concerns and stuff, a lot of places are using like the Marco rock. And then what you'd want to do is go to the local fish store, and a lot of local fish stores will sell the live rock out of like a drum or a bin or something, and you buy a couple of those to seed your tank, much like you would with a sponge filter in freshwater. And so you'd seed it with live rock from the fish store or a buddy, and then you use a lot of the dry rock.
Absolutely. So yeah, my local fish store, Aquatic Marine, they've got a couple 100 gallons worth of tubs underneath one of their saltwater displays, and that's where they have their live rock, like you mentioned. It goes down in there, it gets seeded. They're using it for filtration, if you will, so it's already good to go, and it's not from the ocean. You don't know what's in it, and it's been taken out of the environment, which I guess a whole another topic, if you will. But I definitely would go with the clean stuff, I guess is the best way to put it. Things that are safe, things that are not having any negative environmental impact. There's nothing wrong with using the man-made stuff whatsoever. And a lot of times it's even better because you can find specific shapes. You can even get, if you want to get into just like freshwater decor, if you want to spend the money on the rock and the driftwood, you can spend the money on the rock and the driftwood, so to speak. I've seen some really nice man-made rock work that was kind of just set in place, almost like an artificial background, except it not being a background. But it's like, hey, you don't have to make an archway. We've molded this rock archway so that you can just put it down in your tank. You're good to go. John McKenzie says, can you use ocean water for water? I feel like, and Aquatic Ascetic says, yes, but you get all the hitchhikers. I feel like there are a lot of things that could be introduced into your tank using ocean water. Not that I wouldn't. And I guess, honestly, it depends on the setup. So I've seen some setups of people that live on water access, and they're doing things that are like a lot of saltwater fish, per se. It might be like a huge vat. So think something more like a fish farm, if you will. And they're using ocean water in those setups. Generally speaking, in a tank, I'm not going to recommend it if you're new. I'm going to say that that's something. Go to your local fish store, buy the salt water, or buy the RO and mix it, or make your own RO and mix it. I really don't think it's going to be worth your time. I think you're also, the potential for pollutants from ocean water. You don't know what's in it. You really don't know what's in it.
Right.
It's
unless
not
I
clean.
know. I know the only place I know of is San Francisco. I think you can get it for a certain price, but I believe that's cleaned. I think they clean it somehow. I don't know how far offshore they get it either.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're like taking a boat and going way out there and spending a lot more just on the cost of operating the boat to get the water, I really wouldn't recommend it. Just walking out on the beach and filling up jugs and taking that back. Just my opinion. Not that you can't do it, but especially if I'm looking, I've put all this time and money into this tank. I've got these expensive corals, these expensive fish. I've spent 6 months, a year, 2 years going through this process of getting everything how I want it, and now I've killed it because somebody dumped something in the water a mile down the beach and I didn't know that it was in there. I've added these little microorganisms that I don't want in there. All the possibilities.
I always look at it as like, go to your local boat dock and see what the water looks like, and then decide whether you want to put it in or not.
Absolutely. Very, very valid point. So not that you can't, just that I personally would not recommend it, John McKenzie. Patrick Hardy says, my uncle used to start up a saltwater with 2 to 3 raw shrimp. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Same thing as, where we feed, the freshwater tank at a fishless cycle. That was one thing I did talk about while you were gone getting the rock, was your beneficial bacteria in saltwater. As far as I'm aware of, there's no beneficial bacteria that actually transitions from fresh to salt. So it's a different strain, if you will. So keep that in mind when you're moving a filter over, that it's not like fresh where you go, hey, I'm just going to move a filter over and it's going to work. Now, if you've got multiple saltwater tanks, you can move rock and things like that. But other than that, you're definitely same cycle, different strain of bacteria. Mr. Manifesto, I know you had a good question earlier and I cannot find it again. If you want to throw it back in the chat, I'll keep an eye out for it. But Mr. Manifesto did say, couldn't you just use sponges? Okay, that was the question. I guess you did ask it again. Maybe I scrolled to the right spot. Couldn't you just use sponges instead of rocks? For saltwater bacteria colonies, I understand the rock looks nice, but in a sump, wouldn't sponges work just as well? Mike, would you like to take that one?
I guess the thing is, with the bubbles of the sponge, it does have an effect on corals.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ran the sponges without air and just used the bacteria from them and moved them like into a sump, you could do that. But you can do that. I mean, I actually suggested that to a friend. I have a friend
Mm-hmm.
who is doing he just bought a 180 about a month ago, and he's working on setting it up. And I was like, just grab a sponge filter and throw it in your old tank and let it seed and throw it in your new one. But that being said, if you run it with air, that's, seriously frowned upon, and basically, it harms corals, etc.
Absolutely. And that's where, if you've ever looked at sumps and maybe you're not familiar with sumps, you'll notice they've got different barriers with different heights to them. Part of the reason they do that is so that you can get the bubbles out of the water before it gets to the return pump, so you're not shooting bubbles up into your display tank, because you can definitely cause issues by shooting bubbles or micro bubbles up into your tank. But that's part of the reason why they do the varying heights on those bulkheads in your sumps. And sumps a whole nother topic that we could do a whole hour by itself with refugiums and that wonderful stuff.
Yep. Go check out Milev's Reef if you want to learn about sumps.
Absolutely. Aquatic Aesthetics. And this is Rob, local fish store owner in Chattanooga area. So keep in mind, this is a fish store owner saying that. Just cycle your tank properly and forget the fish store rock. Half the time it's covered with aptasia or worse. So I will say I have seen that in a lot of places. I'm definitely not disputing that. But there are also some good places too. I know my local fish store, Aquatic Marine. I 100% trust what I get from them. Kind of like I trust Corey at Aquarium Co-op. It's almost the same level of ethics, if you will. I know that it's not somebody just trying to sell me crap. I know that it's somebody that actually cares and puts in the time they need to make sure it's quality and it's not going to cause problems. But yeah, I've definitely seen that.
And for those who don't know, aptasia is basically a pest, like an anemone. It looks kind of like a sort of like a grayish, pinkish colored little anemone, and it's considered a pest basically. And
Absolutely.
They're a pain in the neck to get rid of.
Yes, they are. I think I guess the closest thing I could relate it to in freshwater would maybe be Hydra.
Yeah,
I guess, yeah. So I think something similar to that if you're not familiar with them. But great question, Mr. Manifesto. I appreciate you bringing that up. Tears Tropical Tanks, the shoreline water is the collection cup of a skimmer. Yeah, essentially. So it's kind of like sea foam. Have you ever seen the ocean or the beach? You got all that foaming stuff that comes up. Yeah, think of all that crap coming out of there. All right, let me get
one thing I do want to bring up we haven't talked about yet is biorefractometer.
Yes,
that's the other thing I grabbed when I was outside.
Nice, very nice.
Biorefractometer. They make the swing arm hydrometer. Do not buy that.
Yeah,
that's all I'll say.
Yeah, the hydrometers. I will say I do own one. I also purchase refractometers though. The swing arm hydrometer is very, very, very unreliable. And it gets out of whack really easy. So, you're putting it in salt water. Most of us are not going to take it and rinse it 100% with fresh water and then dry it appropriately and all that stuff. So then you get this, build up on there, and that affects the buoyancy of that arm in there that's measuring it. So you get false readings. Like you said, just get a refractometer.
And they've come down in price quite a bit from when I started.
Right. I will say though that's something. So if we're in the process of, I'm going to go down and I'm going to, get my water from the local fish store. I know a lot of us in the freshwater are probably past the point of testing our water, so to speak. If you're diving into the saltwater, I'd recommend while you're doing your trips to the fish store, you're getting your water, take water samples with you, get it tested, because they'll also test the salinity or the specific gravity, measure how much salt is in the water. But if you're purchasing it from the local fish store, they've probably already got it where it needs to be on the salt content. And that's one of those things that you can kind of be looking into during your initial 6 months startup, if you will, while you're doing your research. So not necessarily an immediate upfront cost per se.
True.
I'm trying to not dissuade people. I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
No. It's one of those things where you're making it as easy as possible, which is definitely a good idea.
Yeah, because I know that it is a rabbit hole, but it's not really any different, in my opinion, again, than somebody that's never done an aquarium. So let's look at it in that sense. If I've never done any type of aquarium, and then I go to Bentley looking at planted tanks,
Right.
It's very much the same thing. It could be overwhelming and going, oh, he's talking about all these light settings and all this, and he's
right.
So I don't want
you have to keep it simple at first.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
And I mean, the one thing I always equate the really hardcore Planet tank guy and the really hardcore reefer is the same person.
Absolutely,
they're absolutely the same person.
Right, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Estressa changed your name back there. Says Fisher Fever, James Ed, howdy. Sorry for being late, but outside watching from my cell phone today. Hello to the Wolf Pack. How are you? I hope you're doing well. Good to see you.
Quite one. Like you talked about, the Hannah has a digital meter for salinity. I've seen 3 calibrated refractometers show 3 totally different settings. That's probably true.
Yeah.
Take the average at that point.
Absolutely. And again, that's one of those things that I'm recommending when you're first getting started. Get your local fish store, test it. It's just going to make it easier while you're learning. Just like we all had a learning phase coming into freshwater. None of us came into freshwater knowing everything. Even if we think we did, we probably didn't. But most of us just kind of went into it, and then we made mistakes and learned. I think one of the upsides to saltwater and having a little bit longer sit time at the beginning is that kind of gives you more time to do that research. Spend the time diving into the other side of YouTube, if you will, other side of FishTube, into the salt side. There's not a whole lot of people that do both or transition back and forth. And it's the same with clubs. A lot of times your local clubs, it's either a freshwater club or it's a saltwater club.
Absolutely.
And I feel like there's always been a big separation in the community there. And so that's part of what I'm trying to do, besides the fact that I want to have a reef tank. And I love that Mike has salt. It's trying to kind of bridge that gap. And
I started in saltwater. Like I did kind of hardcore saltwater for the first 8 years before I really ever delved into freshwater. And now the barn is almost all freshwater now. But I am kind of getting the itch to do some more salt.
Absolutely. Data Kid Aquatics, what's going on? Kenny E says, LOL light setting. James, are you talking about on and off switch fish room fever? Yeah, exactly. And he's referencing Bentley, and that's some of us, that's a lot of us. Mine is lights on, lights off, and then like light duration is as far as I really go into lighting. I want to get enough light to get really good plant growth, but not have lots of algae from it. You get an awesome guy like Bentley, who's literally written, a program that people are calling and telling Fluval about, going, hey, he's got this programming for this light that you all need to know about because he's done the research and, has the brain to do that type of stuff. It's very much the same on the saltwater side.
And I think the one thing that they've mentioned here in the chat between John Larson and Aquatic Aesthetics is they talk about stable temps, but that goes for anything. Yep. Right. I mean, you really, in your saltwater system, you want to have it stable. You don't want the temperature fluctuating. You don't want pH fluctuating, salinity, the trace cell elements and anything else like that. I mean, you really, one thing that I've always heard people say is, I think it's really true, is don't put anything in your tank you can't test for.
Yep.
There's a lot of things that are sold out there that will help you, but if you can't test for it, then don't put it in.
Right. I 100% agree with that. And that is where I will say, I don't know that it's necessarily harder or quote unquote easier to crash. But it is one of those things that when you screw it up, you definitely can screw it up big time when it comes to saltwater.
And it happens quick. It does happen extremely quickly.
And I feel like, again, a lot of that goes back to water volume, which is why you see people that have these 10-gallon display tanks that's run into 10, 20, 55 gallons of sump. And that's so that they have a larger water volume. So if something goes off, we'll say one drop, that one, I don't know how I want to measure it, 1 milliliter, the parts per million is going to be massively different in a 5-gallon versus a 100-gallon. So it goes back to dilution there. And that also is the same for temperature. It's, if you have, something goes out, your power goes out, whatever happens, it takes more time for 100 gallons of water to change temperature than it does 5 gallons of water. So it keeps that stability.
Yeah,
but
we had what was it? We had a 4-day power outage here in Michigan. This is when things were still in the basement.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally, between the freshwater and saltwater, I only lost 2 fish. I had blankets and hot water bottles and everything else, but there was a butterfly fish and some cardinal tetras were the only 2 things I lost.
Okay.
Like the 20 tanks I had. So you can save them, and they are, I think the one thing that people think about saltwater fish is that they think that they're like, you breathe on them and they'll die.
Delicate, super delicate.
Yeah, but they are hardier than you think, right? I had, I've seen clownfish live in water in the 60s for a while, right?
Yeah.
And some of them, obviously some of them are hardier than others, and you don't want to stress the fish, but at the same time, they do travel, in the chain of custody, very similar to your freshwater fish. It may be a little bit shorter. They may stop in LA and get oxygenated,
right.
But it's one of those things where that fish just travels a lot like your freshwater fish. There's saltwater the wholesale chain and everything else is fairly similar.
Absolutely, and I would dare say, and I might get some kickback from this or some hate. Freshwater is very much the same in terms of we tend to baby our fish a lot more than need be. We tend to think they're a lot more delicate. And I'm not, let me clarify, because somebody's going to misconstrue that. I'm not advocating abusing your fish or mistreating your fish. I'm simply saying that we have, people freak out. And I'm not talking about feeding guppy fry here. So I'll specify that too, because it's always walking on eggshells, so to speak, while trying to speak the truth. But some people freak out if they're going to miss one day feeding their fish. And all my fish are going to die. Who's going to feed my fish while I'm out of town tomorrow? They'll be fine. Somebody's going to crucify me for this. I have one tank. I haven't water changed it in 3 months. I feed it maybe every 2 weeks. It's got about a dozen small fish in it. Everything's perfectly happy, perfectly healthy. The plants do fine. The numbers are fine. The fish aren't, emaciated. They're okay. They're living, I guess you could say, more towards their natural, I'm not full all the time, environment, if you will. Fish can handle a lot more than we give credit for. Not necessarily that you want to go to that extreme, but to your point, it's not like, these delicate little flowers that are just going to wither and die if I turn around and look back the wrong way. Absolutely.
Right. There's some that are, in both sides that are less hardy than others. If you start getting into butterfly fish and saltwater, things like that, those, and one thing too is make sure you find a good source for your fish.
Right.
And quarantine, and always quarantine, because do it for a month, because treating a reef tank is horrible compared to treating like your planet tank, because there's not the med trio that was safe for your snails and your fish and your corals and everything. Like literally, you have to pull all the fish out, treat the fish, and then leave the tank fallow for a month, 6 weeks, 2 months, while the parasite goes through, say it's ick, goes through its cycle and dies out. Yeah. And that's not fun.
Absolutely. And that goes back to like the live sand and live rock. I really am a huge advocate for a really trusted source versus freshwater. I might get some junk off of Craigslist used. I really, really want you to trust your source on saltwater, and just don't rush things. Michelle Kinsey, good to see you. Says, I appreciate all the information. Because of what you just said and everyone else's input, I'm now looking at it in a different perspective. I feel more comfortable with starting salt. Thanks. Absolutely glad to see you, Michelle. And that's kind of why we're talking. And I know that we're kind of poking our heads down some rabbit holes, but we're trying not to get too far down it.
Trying very hard not to go completely.
It's easy to do. It really, really is. Tony Cancelier says, guys, it's really fascinating to hear all of this, especially for someone who has not had any experience in saltwater tanks. Much appreciated to you and all your guests. Tony, I appreciate you. Kenny's headed out. Have a great night, Kenny. Dagon Aquatics.
Hey, Kenny. I think
right.
one of the
the president.
Yeah. And I think one of the things to keep in mind too is like the research, like you had said earlier, is really important.
Yeah.
There's certain fish and how they're a lot like African cichlids, honestly, in how you introduce the fish and how you put the fish in the tank. There's a way to do it so that it doesn't go haywire, because they have the aggression level. You know, when you start talking about tangs and angelfish and damsel, they have an aggression level of an African cichlid or more. Like if you put, a tang is used to swimming miles around in the ocean, and now you put it in a 125-gallon tank, it's going to be, kind of angry, right? So there's a way that you have to introduce the fish, and so the system works correctly, and so you don't have huge aggression issues.
Absolutely. It's very much the husbandry comes into play a lot with saltwater. And that's part of, just like we have in freshwater. Oh, I want to get this fish, but it's not compatible with this tank, so I have another tank. There's very much a lot of that. One thing I will say, again, on the research, is you definitely want to look into sizes. When you're looking at fish, look at their size, because the last thing you want to do is buy this little tang because it's pretty and it's going to go in your 55-gallon reef tank. Come to find out that thing gets, 12, 14, 16 inches. Just check on those things. Don't hesitate to pull out the old cell phone. Again, that's one of those things in this day and age. I don't really believe that there should be such thing as an impulse buy, because now we can research it right there, and it's not necessarily a fact unknown. You don't have to buy it and then go try and find out after the fact. You can look at your phone and go, oh, that's going to get to 18 inches, and I've got a 75-gallon tank. I don't want to do that.
Yeah, you don't want to put your big Nassau tang or unicorn tang or whatever you want to put in one of those. And at 55, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Recon 338 says, I went 6 months one time with only top offs, no losses, healthy spawning fish. And then Dragon there saying, Recon, I don't admit it much, but I top off for long periods between water changes. Absolutely. I knew there was others out there that aren't doing the standard water changes all the time on everything. But a lot of times maybe we're scared we're going to get hate. I'm just going to, I've always told it like it is, and I will continue to
or just go look at Lucas. I mean, Lucas runs his on plants and
but
air, no air, depending. I haven't followed as much as I should, but no air, and and it all works out fine.
So I will say I am down at the bottom of the chat. I wouldn't be surprised if I'd missed a couple of things rolling through there while we were talking. If you have something we didn't address, feel free to throw it in. Priscilla is on in about 25 minutes or so. So a couple of things I do want to touch on. Corals. When you're first getting into corals, one of my personal recommendations, and some people cringe, and you might cringe, Mike, being a saltwater guy, I typically tend to recommend get some zinnia and some green star polyps. And he's cringing because zinnia is the duckweed of the saltwater world.
That's kind of funny because they were talking about it back in the Wayback Machine on Real Fish Talk. And I had said the same thing because Joel and Corey were talking. I'm like, Corey's like, oh, I love pulsing zinnia. Yeah. And I'm like, that is the duckweed of saltwater.
It is. That's one of those things. If you were to bring that to a frag swap at somebody's house for the monthly club meeting, they're going to look at you like you brought duckweed to a freshwater club meeting.
Right.
But I feel like that's something.
Aquatic Express is like, no.
He said, no. I seriously, that was.
No, I know what you're saying. It's a way to get an early win.
It is,
so that you can move on to other. Oh yeah, and you're trying to trees. Yeah,
absolutely.
You know what? Good one too. Actually, a good one is like the leather coral. Like you're just your basic leather coral.
It is. It definitely is. And I
It's
will
not
say that
too pretty, but it lives. And if you do things right, you won't kill it.
all right.
You know, those and zoanthids, like you said earlier, are great beginner corals as well.
That is an actress, not a coral. Oh, now I'm scared to put. Now I'm scared to put pulsating with that, and I don't want to know what comes up. Here we go. All right, let me close this. Share that so people can kind of look at it. So what you're looking at is this stuff right here. And it's really, really pretty. It does. So if you're being successful, if your tank is going well, it's going to go everywhere. But it's really cool stuff. And a lot of people do hate on it. But I know we've got people like Bob Kaler, Kaler's Aquatics. He loves the stuff. I think it's pretty. I've kept it before. It's something that, like you said, you can have an easy win with it. It's a great way to get into corals and not fail. It's almost like starting out with some guppy grass. If you're getting into planted tanks on the freshwater side, you can get it and it starts growing and you're like, oh man, this stuff's doing really, really well. It's really neat. The leaves, if you will, I'm trying to just kind of simplify this. They pulsate and they do this, and you'll see them close up. It's really fun stuff. Green star polyps is another one that I personally found super easy to grow.
I hate bridal passion.
Right. But what I would recommend is maybe put those in on a rock. You know, have one rock in your tank that's kind of off to the side so it's segregated. That way, you get to the point you're like, okay, I'm ready to actually try and get some stuff going. You could pull that rock. You could take that rock. You could put it in your sump. You could toss it. You know, you could, I mean, if you want to, you could just kill the zinnia off of it. You could take it and go, hey, local fish store, you want this stuff? You know, lots of options. Maybe you swap it around to somebody that likes some zinnia. You go, hey, Bob Kaler, I've got this massive, you know, rock that's covered in zinnia. You want to swap me a couple of polyps of a zoanthid or something? Or, you know, you never know. But it is an easy win. It's something that it's pretty to look at. It got a lot of movement to it. It grows very differently depending upon what type of water flow you get on it. So you can get some long stringy variations or you can get some bunched up variations. But it's something that you can have success with from the start without having to put a lot of time and money into it. And that's another thing is it's not super expensive. God, you know, if you do kill it, it's not a huge loss versus if you go out there and you drop $100 on this little teeny circle, which that's technically, and I don't have one here, of course. There's one in the tank behind me, but those little fish room fever chips, as everybody called them, those are actually frag discs. So, you know, you're not spending $100 on something the size of a silver dollar and killing it. And then you're like, oh God, I'm done. I quit. I'm out of here. Put this down, remove from stream. We talked a little bit about damsels. So I guess we're in the startup process. You know, we've set up the tank. We put our live rock, our sand in there. I always, and this is just me, would say get a couple of damsels or a couple of maybe cardinals. So you've got something going in the tank while you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do? Am I going to do a reef? What fish am I going to do? You've got some sort of activity, so it's not a blank tank that you're like, forget this, I don't have time. And
I almost like clownfish, honestly. I mean, obviously you want to get the cycle going first so you don't harm the fish with the ammonia. But I like clownfish as your first fish, other than damsels. Even though clownfish are damsels, I mean they're related.
Oh yeah,
clownfish are. There's something you would want to keep in the tank. Get like a pair of clownfish. I mean, one, they're captive bred now, so they're hardy. You know, and get us a pair of like Ocellaris or Percula clownfish in there, and that's a really good. It's a hardy fish. It's a good it's a good win on the fish side, and then you can go from there. And then it's not something like a damsel that you're not going to want like 3 weeks later, right? When it turns into a hate machine and like, you know.
Absolutely. I can definitely agree with that. They are they're hateful things. Like you said, pound for pound, they're one of the meanest fish that you've got. I'm trying to find this question. There was a good question here. Oh, there it is. Mike's Aquatics and Things says Fish Room Fever, Fish Tank Barn. Like I said, you have 6 months to do research for some equipment when setting up saltwater. What equipment do you not want to skimp on when first setting up? Lighting, in my opinion, is going to be the biggest thing.
Lighting and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, light and protein skimmer is the other one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because there's some that are just goofy to set up and they're goofy to dial in and things like that. So Aquatic Aesthetics and good luck catching a damsel in a reef tank. Yes,
no, you don't want to have to do that.
Catching any fish, catching saltwater fish is honestly probably one of the worst things on earth to do. Because their natural environment, when something happens, their instinct is to hide in the rocks.
Right.
And so you have to tear apart every single rock to get the fish out.
Yes. Yes. And that goes back into just the basic thought process of doing your saltwater. You want to spend a little more time doing research and thinking your stuff through. But yeah, no, there's trying to get anything out of a reef tank is next to impossible. Now there is a company, and I won't go like too far into it, but it's Tank Mates, and they've got this awesome like bubble catcher floating thing that they've designed that works pretty well. But it's not a fun process. Let me get my chat back up here. But yeah, those are the two things. When you decide that, okay, I am at the point I am going to do a setup with a protein skimmer, don't buy the crappy one that's going to have a lot of finicky little parts and pieces and dialing issues. Lighting, and this is where Mike and I may go separate ways. I feel like if you're doing Fowler, lighting is not nearly as important. You want to have lights on it, but you don't have to worry as much about the lighting.
No, I would
if you're
agree.
doing like
buy like the red, what is it? It's the blue and the Aquaneat like blue and white lights.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that freshwater we tend to stray away from the blue, and a lot of that is because yes, freshwater plants utilize blue extremely well, but they only utilize a small amount of it. So it's like, oh, this thing processes blue great. Well,
I learned that the hard way. I was lazy and used one of my saltwater lights. I didn't want to do that anymore after a while.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. John Larson said, okay, that's back and forth. I don't want that to sound like an argument. That was just a conversation I didn't want to butt my head into. Quite Aesthetic says, I have 2 different types of zinnia. I call them large hand and small hand. The small hand is better to have, in my opinion. Absolutely. I am really, really, really looking forward to zoanthids.
Those are good beginner corals too, actually.
Yeah. You probably won't see one in there for many, many months. So let's talk mandarins, because that's one of those fish that I feel like even people that have never done saltwater, they've seen that fish. I'm going to pull up a picture of it, and they're familiar with that fish. And that's one that everybody wants. They're like, I want to set up a tank so I can buy that fish. And I'm like,
I like them.
See you in 2 years.
That's the one. That is the one. No. Go ahead. Go pull it up and we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So this is probably, I don't want to say the most killed fish on the saltwater side, but it's definitely up there.
You know what? Probably green chromis is probably the most killed fish.
Yeah, I think those are killed.
They're the most imported, and then they're the most killed because you'll buy like 7, and then they'll slowly kill each other off until they have a pair. It's a weird. Even in like a huge tank, they'll sit there and they'll pick each other off over time, and like a year and a half later, you have Yeah, that's just Daniel's absolutely right. They need plenty of copepods.
Yes. Absolutely beautiful fish. I love these little guys. I do.
Are dragonettes just as hard?
Yeah, which they are.
Yeah, they're all similar. I think the green one is a little easier, if I remember correctly. I think the green one's a little not as picky, but the issue with them is you need to have copepods, which are basically like little microscopic comb beetles and bugs and stuff like that, and that's what they'll eat. Now they have been captive bred, so if you can find a captive bred one, you probably will have better luck. But I would get a few years in before I would try one.
Absolutely. That's what I was going to say, is when people say they want a mandarin, I'll see you in 2 years. Because it's way too easy to put that fish into a tank that is not going to thrive in. And then you're trying to play catch up and you're buying pods, which you hopefully have access to be able to do it. But you're trying to buy enough pods to keep up with this fish that just wants to eat pods all the time. Deb Paul D's got a great question. Says, do salt tanks need daily attention? What do people do when they get when you go out of town, aka vacation? Mike, I'm going to let you take that one since you've actively got a lot of salt tanks running.
Honestly, it depends on the system, but I really don't do anything different. I mean, I may put an auto feeder on it, but other than that, they can go the week just like your freshwater fish without eating. I really wouldn't. And one thing with saltwater though is I do set up a lot of automation, which helps with like auto top off. One thing I would recommend if you do travel and have a saltwater tank, get the Neptune, the Apex auto top off system. It's got optical sensors plus a manual shut off, so you have 3 layers of redundancy. And that's really it. Is if you have an auto top off set up, that I honestly would do very little different. Obviously, and then one thing, if you're going on vacation, and this kind of goes for freshwater too, is don't change stuff before you go on vacation. Like
Absolutely.
Maybe a couple weeks or before, leave the thing alone and don't change it, and let the system run, and you should be okay. And Absolutely. It goes back to a lot of the ecosystem, right? If you've set up the ecosystem correctly, it will work just fine for you while you're on vacation for your week vacation. If you're going into 2 weeks, you might want to have someone check on it, but I would be darn sure who's checking on it and they know what they're doing.
Yeah, I would almost say, in my opinion, if it's the option of leave it be for 2 weeks or have somebody that has no clue check on it, leave it be for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because you don't want them in there. And, I saw the water was down, so I took some water from the tap and poured it in there.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Let it be.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing we didn't really mention is there's ways to make your life easier in the saltwater. If it just costs money, but it is kind of worth it. For example, like buying like auto top off systems and things like that. I know we may be going a little further down the less beginner rabbit hole, but I find that to be one of the main things to help you keep the tank going.
Absolutely. All right, so we've got about 9 minutes left because I don't want to run on to Priscilla's time. Get your pen and paper, ladies and gentlemen, if you've hung out this far. So I want to kind of give a list of, first list being our essentials that we need for setup, and then the second part of the list being things to be looking into during that first 2, 3, 6 months. So starting out, you're setting up a new tank or you're transitioning a freshwater to a saltwater. You want to get your live sand, your live rock from a reputable source, somebody that you know and trust. You don't want to transition your gravel over, and you want to be having your water tested or get a test kit and test it. And again, there is a difference in the fresh and saltwater test kits. So if you've got the API master test kit, you've got the fresh one, hopefully, that you've been using for your freshwater tanks. There is a marine version. Those are the biggest.
Refractometer too, I would say.
Yeah, you could definitely put that in there. If you're starting it, and in my opinion, if you're starting it and money is kind of a thing at first, because they can be a little pricey. What are they down to now?
Like $20.
Oh, well, that's not bad. I used to be like $90. You walked in the store and they're in the case, and it's like, hey, here's this $90 one. This is the cheap one. It's used from the local Reef Club.
No, they're way cheaper now.
Okay, yeah, $20. I definitely would say go ahead and get that.
I mean, plus if you want to make sure you're topping off correctly, right? That's why.
Right. Yeah, so that's a big thing we didn't really touch on. But when you're doing a top off, you are adding in fresh water. You're not adding in salt water because salt does not evaporate. So when your water evaporates, it's raising your salt content. Just to touch on it quickly. So just, again, when you're researching, look into topping off. That's when you're going to be using most likely your RO water with no salt to do your top offs, and then salt water to do your water changes. Once you've got it, okay, it's set up and running. I threw my sand and my rock in there. I've got my hang on back that's running. I'm getting the cycle going, which I won't get into. There are different ways to get the cycle going. Same with fresh water. Couple things to research. We've bought our refractometer because that's only $20. Learn how to use that thing. So do a little research on how to use it. Make sure you're using it correctly. I feel like just with freshwater, the biggest thing is people not testing things properly. Human error is not often accounted for. People, it has to be this because I did it. Well, you probably did it wrong.
Right.
So, but
and
some
do
things,
it test it more than once, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That way you can get an average. Some things to be looking at: your lighting. What are you planning on doing? What are your thoughts? Kind of be looking into your lighting setup. Protein skimmer, that would be another one to put on the list to be researching. These are things you're going to do some research before you
some sort, right? It doesn't have to be
right,
like the bashy like $600 sump, right? I mean, you can use some of those black. I've done it in my saltwater breeding subs. That black crate from Home Depot, and some. You can start with that.
Absolutely. If you don't have a sump, you can definitely run a canister, or you can do hang on backs like Kaler's Aquatics. Yeah. He's got tremendous luck running titles. If you go look at his big, was 180 gallon. I think it's got like 4 titles on that thing.
Yeah, you can do that. Absolutely. Yeah. I know someone else has done that too. And they've had a purple tang that's lived. I think it was actually a hang-on back refugium, but it was very similar to a hang-on back filter. But he's had a purple tang that he's had for 16 years.
Yeah, so I don't want people to be scared of it. At the same time, I want to really emphasize research.
And you got to respect it, though. Yeah, that's the thing. You don't want them to be scared, but you want to respect it, right?
Right. Absolutely. That's a very good way to put it, Mike. That really is. It's not something to be taken lightly, but it's also not due to a difficulty level, so to speak.
Correct.
And there are the biggest thing, and the thing that I guess would be true or legitimate, because you hear the main things are it's hard and it's expensive. It can be pricier, and it is pricier.
It's expensive when you screw up, though.
Yeah, it's super expensive when you screw up. But it doesn't have to be a super expensive hobby to get into, to start. It really doesn't have to be expensive to start out in saltwater.
Right. If you take it slow and you build it, then that's the way I would recommend to do it. Right. You don't go out and spend it all at once, because you may not like it. Right. You may get halfway into it. You may like I don't like doing this. And so then you've invested thousands of dollars in equipment, maybe, and then you don't like it and you got to get rid of it. And so, I mean, I really advocate taking it slow.
Absolutely. Now, if money is no option, A, hit that super chat button. And B, no, I had to throw that. B, a lot of local fish stores, or maybe not even local fish stores. I know mine in particular has maintenance along with being a local fish store. But there are a lot of maintenance companies. There are a lot of people. If money's no option, you can call somebody, have them set your tank up for you exactly how you want it. Throw a couple grand at it, and then have them come out and deal with it. Money's no object. It's not a problem. Go for it. I've seen people do that. I've been in the store when people come in and say, "Hey, I need you to set me up a 75 Reef gallon. Here's $5,000. Do these things." if you could do that, great. And again, the super chat button's on the right-hand side down below where you type, if you can do that.
I have a friend of mine that he used to. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Rainforest Cafe.
I feel like that name's familiar, but I couldn't place it.
It's a restaurant, and they have fish tanks in it. And then the one up by me, they have saltwater tanks in it. And one of the guys in our fish club was the curator of the rainforest. And they have all kinds of other themes, like they have like fake zebras and stuff and gorillas and whatever else in it. But he was the curator of it, and he left that, and now he's like he started his own aquarium maintenance business.
And see, that's awesome.
He does all saltwater basically.
That is awesome. Like my local fish store, they started out, I guess, with maintenance and custom tank builds and stuff, and so he's still got the maintenance side, and they do setups and things like that. Let me pull this off of here for the end. We are about to go over to Priscilla here in a minute. I've really had fun. I hope you all have had fun talking saltwater. I know it's a little bit different, but it looks like we had a lot of people that enjoyed it. We had some people that are now a little bit more relieved and more open to the idea of doing it. Sorry, I'm trying to stop that so we can bring that back to here and grab my chat back up, because there were two last things I wanted to address. One of which was aquatic aesthetics. Rob said a universal power supply, the UPS system, a backup battery. When you get into the point that you're putting money into this thing and you're putting the corals in there, and I'm spending a lot of money on a lot of things that could die easily, because you can get into some really expensive stuff. Again, how deep do you want to go? Definitely would recommend a backup power supply to keep things running. That's something
or just a generator.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I don't worry about nearly as much in freshwater. But once you get into establishing a system and you're starting to put a lot of money into corals and things, if you decide to go that route, it's definitely worth the investment to have the backup battery supply. Great point, Rob. Aquatic Aesthetics, thank you for that. Darn it, I forget who it was. Somebody had mentioned way too much blue light. I think it was Paul. There was Paul. Said there was way too much blue light from his beams work. I'm curious if that's one of the beams works that has the little diodes to where you could just put some black paint over some of those blues. Give that a shot. If it's got the bulbs where you could do that, or the diodes where you could do that to cover some of the blue ups that you're getting way too much blue and algae. But Mike, I really appreciate you coming up, especially with it being impromptu.
No problem. Thank you. I was busy making thumbnails and stuff, so no problem.
Gotcha. It's been awesome talking to you, and it was really nice to have you on here as somebody that's very much into saltwater, breeds saltwater fish. Of course, my buddy Ed, Chattanooga Ed, thank you for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you all. I haven't even looked at what we've got going on here. 79 people watching, 89 thumbs ups. A huge thank you to all the super chatters. And again, congratulations, Mary Beth McCubbins. Super glad to hear about your husband being cancer-free. That is awesome. All the members, the moderators, thank you for everything that you all do. The lurkers, the listeners, the questioners, commentators, contributors, and of course, my replay crew. I love you guys. Go check out Priscilla. She is coming up right now. Link is in the chat. Hit the thumbs up on your way out. Subscribe if you haven't. Check out Mike, the Fish Tank Barn. I'll put a link in the description. If you've caught the replay and you've got this far, check him out. Of course, Chattanooga Ed.
Thank you.
So
check
next
out
time,
James and Ed. Subscribe as well.
Very much appreciate that. Keep your fish healthy. Keep yourselves healthy. Catch yourself a little fish room fever. Maybe get salty.